So our story begins, as so many do, with once upon a time. In a time when the veil between the worlds was thinner, in a time when creatures of the shadows still lurked in the mist as it hung low. In a time when it was said that the trees were so tall they could have shook hands with the sun when it passed over them at midday. And it is in this time that we find ourselves in a dark Irish night, with the rain and the wind lashing down upon a small cottage. The occupants of the cottage sleeping soundly, the husband, the children. The only one awake was the woman of the house, and she sat silently in the living room, gently carding the wall. And she sat there in the stillness, in the darkness, contented, and still until she heard a knock upon the door. Now she called out, wondering who it might be calling at this unearthly hour. But the only reply she got was, "I am the witch of the one horn. Let me in, let me in." If you were to ask her later, she wouldn't have been able to tell you exactly why she'd opened the door. Perhaps she thought it was the japery of her fellow villagers. Perhaps she thought she misheard. But whatever it was, she was compelled, and opened the door she did. And sure enough, standing there, crooked nose protruding from her face, lank and greasy hair rolling down her shoulders, clothes tattered and torn around her heels, was a witch, and sure enough, a single horn poked from her forehead. Now this witch marched herself into the house, completely uninvited, sat down, and began carding the wall with no further communication to the woman. So time passed. Eventually the witch did speak. She said, "Where are my sisters? They delay too long." And no sooner had she said that than a second knock came upon the door. And again the woman called out, asking who it was, and the reply came, "I am the witch of the two horns. Let me in, let me in." And sure enough, there standing there was a witch, two horns poking from her forehead, this time carrying a spinning wheel. And she plunked it down in the living room and she began to spin. 12 witches in total, each with one more horn than the last. Which of the 12 horns beginning to develop a sort of crown of horns around their forehead. Those witches sat in the living room and they chanted and they cast and they wove magic into a cloth. And all the woman could do was stand there, transfixed, paralysed with horror. Nothing she could do. And time passed, and the witches demanded of her cake. Now she went into the kitchen and found a very strange thing. She found that all the pots and pans were stuck fast to the shelves, all except from the sieve. And this meant she had nothing with which to collect water from the well to mix the meal to make cake. So she ventured out into the night, the rain lashing at her still. And she made a few vague attempts to try and retrieve some water, but of no avail. And so she sat down and she began to weep hopeless tears, for she feared what the witches would do if she could not provide cake. And these tears rolled down her face, they landed on the earth and melded with the rain. And in that moment, she heard a voice. "Hey! Hey, you!" And she could see no one approaching through the rain. But the voice came again. "Hey! Hey, you, down here!" She looked down the well and all she could see was blackness. But that appeared to be where the voice was coming from. And it said, "Take yellow moss and clay. It will act like plaster and bind the holes." So she did as instructed, and sure enough, it allowed her to retrieve the water. And the voice said again, "When you have made the cake, come out to the north face of your house and shout 3 times, 'The mountain of the Fenian women and the sky all around it is on fire.'" So the woman returned to the house and she made up the cake and she presented it to these witches, who did a very odd thing. They took blood from all the occupants of the house while still they slept and smeared it, creating the hideous blood cake thing, which they just left upon the side and continued with their work. The woman got out of the house, went to the north face, cleared her throat, and said, "The mountain of the Fenian women and the sky all around it is on fire! The mountain of the Fenian women and the sky all around it is on fire! The mountain of the Fenian women and the sky all around it is on fire!" And for a moment, silence, stillness, but then they came, bursting from the threshold of the house, screeching, clambering over each other to escape, and disappeared off into the distance. And the house was empty once more. The woman, she returned to the well, begging her thanks, but the well was not done yet. "They will surely return when they realise they have been tricked, and when they do, they will seek their vengeance. Here is what you must do to deny them access. Follow these instructions carefully." And followed them carefully she did. She took the cloth that the witches had woven, and she placed it half in and half out of the chest, which she locked tight. Then she took the water with which she had washed her children's feet and sprinkled it over all the thresholds of her house. Then she took a great oak plank and nailed it over the door. Then she took the cake that the witches had smeared with blood, and she broke it up and crumbled it into many pieces, and she fed it to the children. And there, in the stillness and the silence and the darkness, she waited for their return, until she thought they might not return, but return they did. Stealthily at first, they began to scratch upon the window panes and tap upon the walls, and eventually they spoke, and they said, "Feet water, let us in." But the feet water replied, "Ha! I am the lakes, I am the streams, I am the rivers, I am the oceans themselves, I am the water of this world. You think I bend to your will? I shall not." So next they said, "Door, let us in." But the door said, I cannot let you in. A great beam obstructs my movement. It is beyond my power to shift. I cannot let you in." But the witches feared not, for they had one last secret weapon. "Cake, let us in." But the cake replied, "Oh, woe is me, woe is me. I cannot let you in. I am broken, I am bruised. I am fed to the children, my power is lost. I cannot let you in, I cannot let you in." And at this, the witches were taken with a great rage. They cursed, they spat, and they swore, but there was nothing that they could do. And so at some point before dawn, they slipped away from whence they came. And they were never heard from again. But you know, if you're ever up and about in the middle of the night, and you should hear a knock upon your door, you just be careful as to who you let in.